How do you decide like, hey, I'm going to go to this whole new market, essentially? I mean, maybe a sub-market, but still a new market, have the confidence to develop?
Yeah, I think when I first started, I relied on my gut and just a feeling. I didn't have any of the tools that we have today. Do a perform a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. We do feasibility studies. We do geotech studies, have a whole system and playbook, if you will, from start to finish.
What do you think is the hardest part of development?
Identifying sites that we can add value to. So we may go through 30 properties, 30 sites or buildings that we want to convert.
What advice would you give someone who's like, hey, I want to get into the storage business, I have no idea where to get started? Today's guest is Wayde. He is the visionary over at Store It, and I'm super excited to talk to Wayde because he's built a great business around self-storage. So Wayde, first of all, thanks for being here. I know everyone's going to be really pumped to learn about your journey and what you have to share with people about the storage business. But before we get into your, storage career, as you might say, who was Wayne before Store It? What did you do before that?
Well, I was a dentist for 20 years, a practicing dentist for 20 years. That's where I got started and allowed me to transition into the self-storage space.
Got it. And so you're obviously, you're practicing dental work. It's kind of a big jump, right? It's not exactly like a related or adjacent industry. How did you decide that self-storage was going to be the business for you, that you wanted to move from, a successful practice as a dentist to something that, candidly is probably a little more high risk?
Yeah. I had a patient that came in that owned about 7 self-storage facilities, and I loved his lifestyle. He had a lot of freedom, and I really valued that. I didn't like trading time for money. The only time I was making money in dentistry is when I had my hands in someone's mouth. And he would come in, he traveled around, he did fishing and hunting adventures, and he had a lot of freedom. And so every time he would come in, I would actually go over. I would have hygienists standing around me like, hey, you got to come do a hygiene exam. And I was always under the mindset, this is important stuff. I want to get some knowledge.
I'm a window of opportunity.
Yes. I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel. If it's been done and it's been done effectively and efficiently, I want to learn from that. I'm a big learner.
Great. Well, obviously, there's a lot of people out there who hear about investing in real estate a variety of different ways. And a lot of people have concepts or dreams about moving from their current role to really doing what you did. And so it takes a lot of, courage and bold action to do that. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your first storage deal, how you got started, where that was. I mean, there's a lot that goes into, going from, hey, I would love to have this lifestyle to, having a facility.
One thing that's important to tell your listeners is that I was really forced into it. I had a spinal 2 disc in my neck that were blown out. I was working on a patient. So in one procedure, one day I was doing dentistry. The next day, that was the last day I did dentistry. So I was kind of forced to start swimming and really understand and shift careers because I couldn't practice dentistry any longer. So at the time, I believed that to be a curse, but it actually turned out to be a blessing as I was able to focus a lot more of my time on understanding self-storage and really going all in and really digging in. So I think the first facility that we built, I had a lot of help from that patient. He was very giving with his time and knowledge, and
awesome.
It was close to my practice, so I could really understand it, but I did make some mistakes. So it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns.
So in terms of that first deal, you said that you developed it. So rather than just buy a storage facility and say, hey, I'm going to try to learn from one that's already running, it's got some tenants in it. Like you did really one of the more, high risk, I guess, from my perspective, high risk endeavors. I mean, development has high risk, high reward. Why did you decide to build out your first site instead of acquire one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And I just assumed that was what to do. There was a piece of property that was in St. Helens where I lived. And as we got into it, there were so many challenges that I just didn't know or understand. And we just worked through it. And we had to move the highway access. We had to put a culvert under a railroad. There was wetland issues. There were some environmental issues. There was like a whole host of things. And I think I just, not knowing what I didn't know about development, I just trudged through it and went through it. And
sure.
I had the good fortune at the time that banks appraised that property or they gave me funding based on the appraised value, not on the cost to build the facility. So I had that luxury of really levering up on the appraised value because it appraised for a lot more than what I had to put in. Now we don't have that luxury any longer. It's cost and not appraisal that you have to bring the cash in. So it's changed a lot since that first one.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate on the first one.
Well, that's great. And, one of the things, at least, when I got into real estate, I got into it flipping houses. And the first deal I did was, tons of stuff went sideways because I really didn't know what I was doing. However, between the first deal and the second deal, I hit a home run on the second one. And it was because I learned so much from the first experience. Maybe you can talk a little bit about just the journey from that first deal to the second one, and maybe how that one maybe went differently, or what you learned from that, what you implemented. Just because that progressive learning process is that's where the experience compounds. So maybe you can tell us about that.
Sure. I had a very similar experience. My second deal was the home run, and we actually sold the first one, took the capital, rolled it into an old 84 lumber site in Forest Grove. And we didn't have to deal with the wetlands or moving access. There was already a building that we just put self-storage inside the building. There was already carports there that they stored lumber under. So we used that for carport parking for RVs and boats. So it made it a lot easier. And there was some light bulbs that went off on that deal. We made more money on that one deal than I did for doing dentistry for 20 years. So that's really what lit the fire, if you will, and started to accelerate the development team and projects that we do.
Got it.
Having that home run.
Yeah. And so this second facility, is that something that sounds like you guys basically bought the site and then developed it and put more units? So your trend has been development. Is that pretty much what the focus is of Store It? Is you guys find sites, develop it, or do you do, repositioning of existing facilities? And if it is one or the other that you focused on, maybe you can explain why you've decided that's the path.
Our focus is to add value, and whatever that looks like, we have two models. We go ground up from just the dirt, and we also will buy a warehouse or a lumber yard or a manufacturing facility and convert that, or a conversion project. So one of those two, and we base our decisions based on adding value. How much value can we add to Store It and to investors that come in on these deals? So we don't buy existing self-storage facilities. It's harder for us to add enough value, get enough juice out of that squeeze to make it worthwhile.
Got it. And so one of the things too, in real estate, I reference, real estate because that's my wheelhouse, right? Whether it's multifamily, residential, those kind of things. We rely heavily on comparables, and it's a very local business. And I assume that your first site was in a completely different location than your second site.
Yep.
So how do you go through some sort of due diligence to feel like you should move forward and that there's a demand for that? Obviously, your goal is to add value. You're creating a product where there's not enough supply. How do you decide, like, hey, I'm going to go to this whole new market, essentially? I mean, maybe a sub-market, but still a new market, have the confidence to develop?
Yeah, I think when I first started, I relied on my gut and just a feeling. I didn't have any of the tools that we have today. So now today, we model everything out, do a pro forma 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. We do feasibility studies. We do geotech studies. We have a whole system and playbook, if you will, from start to finish, where when I first started, it was just kind of willy-nilly and more of a gut. And it worked out for me, obviously, but now there's a lot more confidence, especially as we take on investor dollars. It's so much more important to have really a system that we take it through and ensure that it's profitable and we can add value.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And sophistication, dials up as your experience goes. And yeah, I mean, if I look at what I've been in real estate for 20 years and in management for 17, and if I think about what I was doing in the first 5 years, I mean, it was just, it's pretty embarrassing looking back, but like you mentioned earlier, you don't know what you don't know. What do you think is the hardest part of development? Like in terms of like every kind of process has a pain point or where there's a high area of friction or where you think most of the risk is. Like what would you say is the most challenging or hardest part about developing?
I would say there's really two, like identifying sites that we can add value to. So we may go through 30 properties, 30 sites or buildings that we want to convert, and maybe one of those 30 actually makes sense for us to do. And then I would say the second one is all of the bullshit around the jurisdictions, whether it be the county or the city, and their interpretation of the code and our interpretation is different, and what they believe to be right. Like we're going through it right now where our property's in the county, the city wants to annex us. We don't want to get annexed. So they're wanting us to give them a half acre of the site and like all of this other bullshit. And so we put,
basically,
we pushed back and we actually had some huge wins. Like a lot of the folks in the county are getting behind us and supporting us because the city's being so unreasonable. So I think it's dealing with all of the different bureaucracies and jurisdictions, whether it be Division of State Land or the county or the city or Army Corps of Engineer, just trying to get it to the finish line is a huge challenge and a process. Yeah. Without a playbook would be a lot more difficult. I look back on some of the early projects that we just did from gut and just kind of trudged through it and made our way through it. But looking back, you couldn't do that today. It would be much, much harder. You probably could, but it would be a lot more risk. I wouldn't want to take that risk for me or the investors.
Yeah. And as you've expanded your development and done more development, have you scaled up the size of the facilities? Like, I'm not sure on the relative typical sizes, but did you go from like 50, facilities or storage units to 100, or like, is that something that you've added as part of the expansion and development, is just bigger sites?
We've identified, we're a lot more specific on our buy box now. So we know that we want 5 acres. So we can have enough to have a manager on site and have enough revenue coming in so we can hire a property management company like you. Like it has to be big enough that the economics work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's, I would say, gotten much bigger. Like we have a facility now in Woodburn, Oregon that has 230,000 square feet where, our first one was 60,000 square feet. So I would say we have, but we're more interested in opportunity and value. So we would do a smaller site if we can add value and get the same IRR or return to us and the investors.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So one of the things I'm curious about, and this is kind of circling back to the origins of how you got started in your career in dentistry, sometimes there are lessons that you're able to carry forward from a prior profession. For me, I was moving from flipping houses into more management of, asset management, investing, things like that for a longer term run versus short term. And, when I was making that transition, I was thinking like, well, you know what, like half of this skill set's going to translate over to the new business and I don't have to worry that much. And what I found out, it was only about 10% of my skill set translated over. It was a completely different animal, completely different business, clients, opportunities, just the whole thing was different. How you found deals. You coming from dentistry, are there lessons you've learned or you did learn in dentistry that you've been able to apply to the storage business, the self-storage business?
Yeah, I would say the biggest lesson that I took from dentistry to developing real estate would be the culture and the core values. So when I was doing dentistry, it was a very light environment. Everybody was laughing. We had fun doing it. We were crystal clear on our core values. And one of the core values doing dentistry was exceptional customer service, whether it's giving an injection or billing or whatever it was. That's our number one core value in real estate development at Store-It. So I think having some clarity around core values and culture and, making it fun. If it's not fun, then nobody wants to show up and it's work. So yeah. I've had the philosophy that my work is my play and my play is my work. There's really not a huge differentiation between the two. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm traveling to sites, I like doing it and it's fun for me. Yeah. Where there were days when I was doing dentistry that it was work. I mean, we still had, a culture, a fun culture and there was fun, but I guess I didn't have the freedom like I do now.
Yeah, I mean, very different probably from just a regulation standpoint and also just immediate human impact standpoint. And I imagine, if you're a dentist, I mean, I try to stay away from the dentist as much as possible, as I'm sure everyone does. But, I have to, and I had this kind of experience somewhat recently in the last 12 months because I had to get a filling, right? And to be fair, it was probably well-deserved. So I didn't blame them for it. But I had this filling done by this person and whatever they did was it was slightly off, probably just in such a way that it would be almost difficult to measure. And I dealt with it for about 3 weeks, and then I finally was like, I got to go back in because this is like not going away. And some other doctor came in and just like did a little thing, like filed some stuff down, and then solved the problem basically permanently. And that was over a year ago. But I will say that I lost a little bit of trust in the first doctor, right?
Yeah.
So now, like, if I have another appointment, it's like I kind of want a different person. Not because I don't think they're maybe good, but it's like I just don't want to have to deal with that for 3 weeks.
Yep.
And so I imagine, trust is a major factor for that profession. And, if you're taking investment money, which it sounds like you do.
Yep.
Has that played a role into how you kind of approach your business too?
I think so. I have an investor that I just talked to the other day, and one of the projects we had to pivot a little bit. There were some grant dollars that got moved, and I thought it was a huge deal. But when I called him, told him what we were doing and how we were overcoming it and pivoting, he said, "Wayde, I trust you. I didn't even look at any of the agreements. I signed everything. I trust you." So I think trust is a really big deal. It's a huge deal. And I think in addition to that, like when I was doing dentistry, at every review, I would ask the employees, if this was your business, what would you do differently? And, if they said I would give myself a $10 raise, I would throw that out. But I really valued input from the team that's doing it every day, all day. Like I'm just a small piece of the big puzzle. And I think with Store-It, I value the team's input and opinions and what direction to go huge. And I think that's been a part of our success, is because everybody takes accountability and ownership, and they're looking for opportunities and solutions, not problems, which is another one of our core values.
Yeah, well, I love that. And it sounds like you've got a lot of good buy-in. And I mean, core values is one of those things that people underestimate the power of, and they sometimes ignore. And I think that's largely because a lot of businesses that are large, the ones that are institutions that we all kind of recognize, they've got these core values, and it sometimes feels like they're just words on a wall, right? But when you get into businesses that are more local or have a really strong culture, then you can see those being practiced. And I always love to see people, if we're interviewing them for positions, to ask us, like, what are our core values, right? Because we try to interview, through the lens of our core values. We like to hire and reprimand based on that same infrastructure. And it just leads to kind of like a North Star. So I love that you guys are focusing on the core values in your culture so much.
Yeah, we hire and fire based on the core values. Like if someone's not a fit, they don't meet those core values, they're gone. In fact, just today, we heard a story of one of our managers at a facility in Central Valley, California, drove to one of the other sites that we're going to start construction on, doing research on the prices of the other facilities, how they were ran, some of their shortcomings. Like he was bought in. We didn't tell him to go to the other facility that we're going to start construction. He just did it. And I think that's so critical to get everybody involved. And like he just took it upon himself to do that. And I think that's through core values.
Yeah. I mean, if it becomes part of your DNA through that process, then that's a huge. One of the questions I have for you, and I've always wondered about this because I've actually never had a storage facility, which, maybe at some point I will, but I have not had a storage facility, but you always see TV shows about storage wars and stuff like that. So I imagine you've dealt with people who've abandoned their property before. What is that process like? I mean, is it really something where you're finding some treasures in there occasionally? Is it like, maybe you can paint a little picture of like how that process works and if there's a secondary market for acquiring those kind of things?
I'm probably not the right person to ask because my stance is I don't want to sell people's possessions. Sure. But we do have that come up and there's a process, but I don't deal with the process. The management company deals with that process. It's a whole legal, you got to report to the newspaper and, send letters and certified mail. And it's a whole process. And I don't know it really well, but it's being done. But we try not to sell people's stuff. That being said, there has been a few units where, we get maybe most of it's not worth selling because if someone hasn't paid for 6 months, it's stuff that they don't care about. But we have currently at one of our facilities, we have a motorhome that doesn't have a title. She was living in it, so we kicked her out and she signed over the motorhome that doesn't have a title or a VIN number or anything. So now we're stuck with this thing that has no value. We got to tow it off and figure out what to do with it. So my experience is it's not as glamorous as the TV show.
Okay.
It's not worth it.
I've not even seen the TV show, but I've seen trailers for it. I'm like, wow, this looks dramatic. Imagine, there might be some stuff in there. I'd always dream about somebody leaving or abandoning like their 1960s whiskey collection, because I collect bourbon, and it would just be, that'd be like a gold mine. People might not realize right away what they have. But so that's good to know. One of the things is, I mean, you've obviously been, in this business for a while now, almost 15 years plus, something like that.
Yeah.
Have you thought about exploring into other asset classes? And maybe you already have, and I just don't know, but have you got into like, oh, maybe we should develop multifamily, or maybe we should develop, stuff for storage for boats and things? I mean, like, have you kind of branched out, or have you really kind of stayed focused?
Yeah. So what I know to be true is where your focus goes, energy flows. And I've started other businesses, from a car wash, junk removal business, moving business, cannabis. I was one of the first licensed producers, farms in Oregon.
Oh, wow.
And I lost about $850,000 in the cannabis business. So I try to stay in my lane, because now I know that when I get out of the lane, I get a flat tire or go in the ditch or something bad happens. So we're hyper-focused on just storage. And that being said, we do some boat and RV storage. So it's all centered around storage. So we stay in our lane, I guess, is we don't venture out.
Storage is your expertise.
Storage is our expertise.
So, being an expert in this, I mean, at this point, you've obviously built enough, facilities, you've run them, you've been in this business. If somebody wanted to start, to get into the storage business, what advice would you have for them in terms of like how to enter the business? Would it be like, hey, do what I did, do the development route, or maybe like buy one and, try to reposition it and improve maybe the rents you're getting in facility? Or like, what advice would you give someone who's like, hey, I want to get into the storage business, I have no idea where to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had a lot of people ask me that same question, and to advise someone to jump in and do a ground up construction where, it's anywhere from $8 to $12 million with a whole bunch of risk. And if you don't have the playbook, if you don't have the expertise and how to do it, I couldn't recommend that to someone. There are some syndication deals where if you can get in with someone you trust, like you said, put money in and maybe learn the process that way, or buy a small facility. I know there's some smaller facilities you can buy, maybe it's, 100 units, something like that on a small site. I would either recommend buying a super small facility that's already up and going, that has some cash flow coming in, and learn it a little bit that way, or do a syndication deal where you invest with someone that you trust and can see the process from start to finish, and be curious, ask a lot of questions, whichever route you go. From my experience, self-storage operators are very open and willing to share their experiences and shortcomings and wins as well. So it's a very great space. There's not a lot of scarcity. From my experience, there's not a lot of, close to the chest. It's open.
That's great. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day too, I've learned just being in business that collaboration, I mean, you can tell somebody how to do something all day long. And so I don't fear sharing information. The execution is the hard part.
100%.
So it's like, you know what? If I give you all the information and you execute, that's impressive. Like that's a win. That's what I want to see. That means the conversation was worthwhile, that time was used well, and that someone else is winning. So I'm glad to hear that's how it is in the storage. I know in my industry, it's very much like that too, but on the brokerage side, less of the sharing, a little bit more close to the chest. At least that's how it's been traditionally. And so you mentioned California and as being a site that you're looking at or expanding within. So it sounds like you're in Oregon and California. Have you gone into any other markets?
We've looked at some other markets, and they just haven't met our criteria quite yet, but we're certainly open to going outside of Oregon, Washington, California.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. One of the things I want to talk to you about, because this seems to be, the highlight or headline, I might say, of every industry right now. And some industries, maybe it's not affecting them, but everyone's talking about, tech platforms and AI and things like that. What is going on in the storage space? Has that been, is that starting to see momentum from these types of tools? Are people talking about how AI is going to bring, efficiency to that business? Like what's going on in that conversation?
We're starting to use some AI in our research and identifying sites. It's really early coming in, but I would say technology is starting to get a foothold in self-storage. Like our sites now have cameras that are monitored 24 hours a day, remote, and they have speakers. So if someone comes on site, someone watching the cameras can say, "Hey, red sweatshirt, the police have been called. You need to leave right now." So I think some things like that and some access control things that we have are starting to infiltrate into the storage space, which is great. We love, keeping up with the times, but I don't think the AI is infiltrated as much as it has in other industries.
Do you think there's opportunity there, or do you think it's not hit that yet because there's a reason it hasn't, or is it just kind of a, blue ocean still?
I mean, there is opportunity. I'm always open to learning better ways of doing things. And, we always, one of our core values, look for opportunities and solutions, not problems. So if there's a better way to do something and it involves AI or a different technology, we always research that and we always want to explore that. But we don't want to be the first in and spend a whole bunch of money on something. So we're kind of waiting to see how it plays out. And we go to the self-storage convention every year to kind of see the new technologies and what's happening and get feedback from folks that are actually using it and then implement it.
Got it. And you touched on conventions, which I'm a huge proponent of. I think there's nothing that's probably moved the needle in terms of my learning curve more than going to conferences for things in my industry, because you're surrounded by people that know your world. They're engaged because they paid to be there. And you can't replace just the human face-to-face connection. You just can't.
Yep.
And within that, you find companies that you admire and you aspire to, and you kind of set as like a benchmark. Are there companies or operations that you've seen that kind of blow your socks off and you're like, hey, we're trying to aspire to that? And how is that influencing your vision at Storeup moving forward?
Yeah, actually that makes me think about something. So for your listeners that are interested in self-storage space, 100% go to the convention and just kind of see what's out there. Talk to some other self-storage operators. That's the best place to get a whole bunch of operators in the room. That would be probably my first piece of advice to your listeners to, if they're interested, go to a self-storage convention. There's lots of conventions all over the country. Go to that. And I would say, as far as operators that we look up to, I mean, there's some 800-pound gorillas. There's some REITs, Extra Space, Public Storage. And I think when I go to some of those facilities, they do some things that we don't do. I don't feel like their core values are really integrated. Maybe the managers don't give an F and, they're not as customer service centric as we are.
Connected.
It's more about, the stock price and profit and loss, and they do some things that some bait and switch where they lower the rates and then 2 months later they raise them. So we try to stay away from practices like that. And I think at first I was kind of enamored with the 800-pound gorilla, but as I dug into it a little bit more, I think being a smaller operator and being a little bit more nimble and really being able to live, breathe, sleep our core values has helped us a bunch.
Got it.
I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
no, it does. I mean, I'm always kind of curious. It's everyone kind of knows who the big operators are, but it's a double-edged sword, right? Because I think, even if they have a great corporate leadership, it's hard to carry a message forward down a chain when you've got that many people. And that's one of the benefits of being a smaller operator. You can be more responsive, you can be more nimble, you can take on opportunities that, deal sizes that may not work from them. Like a big thing in real estate investing in our market, or like our industry and specifically, is, we can go into markets that institutional investors won't go into.
100%.
Right? And so that's less competition, but it does require, more intimate knowledge of those areas because you don't have as much data to work with. You're not able to pull reports and find, all the comps and all the things that you might want to see, especially like from a socioeconomic and demographic standpoint. So that's kind of how you outcompete is you just have really strong local market knowledge.
Yep, 100%. I would say we operate in markets where most of the REITs aren't in. Some of the markets we're in, the REITs are in, but most of them, it's just, mom and pop operators that we're able to we allow some sophistication to the facilities that just bring it a little bit above what's happening in those markets. So that's our strategic advantage.
Got it. So one of the things that is true in real estate, I mean, we've got, heads in beds, right? We've got habitability issues. We've got all kinds of maintenance things you could ever imagine and not imagine happening. what is the maintenance side of storage? Like you guys got some walls and roofs, and I mean, I realize some are maybe temperature controlled and things like that, like especially if you get into things like storing wine collections. That's maybe a different story. But what kind of maintenance stuff are you dealing with, or capital expenditures for your facilities?
It's very low. We have concrete, steel, and garage doors. We don't have to deal with toilets and termites and well, we have tenants, but the laws are a little different for self-storage. Like if someone doesn't pay, the gate gets locked, right? Where I think in your industry, you have to hold their hand and you're married with them.
Unbelievable.
Like I don't even.
It's unbelievable. And I will say, Oregon is semi-reasonable compared to some other states, but they've slowly made it more and more difficult. There are some rules that came out during COVID that they're like, these are emergency measures. They'll go away after COVID. So one of the questions that I have, because, and again, I'm relating this to my experience, the background that I've got, we live and die by our lease agreement, right? That is one of the things that expertise and experience gives you, is what needs to be in the rental agreement. How does that work in self-storage? I mean, is this something like if I wanted to go and sign up for Store It, I could just go online and sign a contract and be on my way? Or do you guys go over the agreement with people? Do you have certain provisions you found that are really critical to have to protect you and your investors?
Yeah, we have the managers go over the rental agreement just so that everybody is on the same page. Some of the big ones are, certain hours you can't come in at midnight. It's just not safe for anybody. And then, the year of we don't want someone bringing in a motorhome that's dilapidated and gonna be our problem if they quit paying and we got to deal with it. So they do go over it, and it's a standardized agreement. I mean, you can get them online, and we've fine-tuned ours with attorneys and really dialed it in. And I think out of we've developed 2,500 units, and I think we've never had a challenge, never gone to court or had it be an issue and in the court system at all.
Businesses. Oh my God, that's wild. But that's great. I mean, it sounds like you got a good operation. You guys do a good job vetting, the tenants. Do you call them tenants?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if the vernacular was the same. So, no, that's awesome. That's really cool. One of the things that we do too is we walk the units. We check on them twice a year just because we want to make sure that there's nothing going on. Sometimes you've got people who are reluctant to report things because they're worried, or they believe that, if I report maintenance issues, my rent's going to go up, or they're going to be upset with me. It's obviously not how we feel. We want to protect the asset. But in storage, there's no one living in there. You've just got kind of a box at the end of the day, and then boxes inside of the boxes kind of. Do you guys have a need to look at the units, or how do you guys make sure that, there's no leaks happening and things like that?
Well, if there's a leak, they tell us about that, but more of an exception than a rule. That doesn't happen often. It has happened, but it doesn't happen. And if that happens, we deal with it very quickly. And as far as looking at the units, we don't do that. What we do is monitor the cameras. Each facility probably has between 50 and 75 cameras throughout the facility.
Okay.
So the managers monitor. So if someone comes in every day and spends all day in their unit, that raises some red flags, and they'll look at that. Mm-hmm. We have had one facility where someone was using that as a in and out there was a mattress in there, and she would bring clients in, and the manager quickly observed that and figured that out and put a stop to it. But there's a few exceptions where crazy things like that happen, but the managers are so good. They identify it quickly and then make a change, and we get them out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the biggest challenges you'd say in owning storage? I mean, obviously, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So from your vantage point, what would you say are some of the things that just operationally are the biggest challenges of owning storage? Or maybe it's on the development side, but what would you say for you is the things that maybe keep you up at night, or you just have a lot of friction with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just spent a day in an office with a business coach, and what I believe to be the biggest challenge or problem was access to capital to develop these, because it's such a big number. And he goes, that's a resource. He says, you don't have a resource problem, you have a resourcefulness problem. And that just hit me right in the face. And I'm like, we don't know what we don't know. So he's like, capital isn't your challenge. If it's a good deal, people are going to invest in it and it's going to be successful. So it's a resourcefulness problem, not a resource problem. And when he told me that, I was like, God, I don't know that I really have any resource problems. It's a resourcefulness problem. So it's my own mindset, really.
Yeah, so makes sense. I mean, it's something that you've got to systemize like any other aspect of the business. We're learning that too in the process of the things that we've been doing. So no, that's a good insight and aha moment there. So I'm going to transition away from this. One of the things that we like to do in our podcast is get to know a little bit more about the guests. And so at the end, we have 3 questions just to kind of learn a little bit more about Wayde, right?
I'm excited.
So the first question I have is, if you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I think it would be Napoleon Hill, because his book, Think and Grow Rich, has had such an impact on my life. One thing that I read every day in my visualization is what we envision in detail with emotion on a daily basis is what shows up in our life. So that emotion piece and envisioning that, and I got that from Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. So I think I would really like to sit down with him. There's so many people, but if I could pick one, it would probably be Napoleon Hill.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And that's an incredible book. And one of the things that's definitely probably in my top 5, because I think for me, it was also a foundational book that I read early on.
Yep.
And it was recommended to me by somebody who I would say was definitely like, in some ways, like a mentor. They definitely like pointed me in the right direction on a few different things. And I think that book was definitely one of them. So that's great.
Yeah.
Another one is I've noticed that, you like to get out and about, you like to travel, you like to do cool stuff. If you could live anywhere in the world, but it had to be for a year, where would you live and why?
I've fallen in love with Croatia. I've taken a few trips to Croatia, and I think that the lifestyle, the climate, the people, how beautiful it is, it might be Croatia for a year.
Cool. Yeah. That's on my list. I haven't been there yet. It's definitely on the list to go. I think we're probably going to try to go to Vietnam this fall, probably October, November. But then probably after that, I think Croatia would probably be next on that list. It looks beautiful.
Incredible. It's spectacular.
So, very cool. And then another one's a pretty simple question. If you had to choose whiskey or wine, which one would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. I like them both so much. I would probably say wine, just because there's such a diversity and there's so many opportunities, especially in the Willamette Valley, to go to all the vineyards and do tasting. And there's such a complexity with all of the different varieties and grapes and how it's, barreled or stainless or oak, or there's just so much to it. And it's so interesting to me. It would probably be wine.
Yeah.
But that being said, whiskey's a very, very close second.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, that's great. I'm a big fan of both. And would you say that you are big into Pinot Noirs if you're talking about the Willamette Valley, or is it more like white wine Chardonnays, or do you have a kind of a...
I would say red wine in general.
Red wine.
I mean, I love Pinots, but more red wine than white wine.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Well, Wayde, those are all the questions I have. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast and to learn more about your Store-It business and what you've built and the culture you're building and kind of what your vision is for the future. So thank you so much for being on this episode. And we're excited to share this with our listeners.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks.